The sun was sinking when fate stepped onto the ridge, and in the hush before night, a single choice began to bind 4 lives together. Out here, mercy carried a cost, and every promise echoed across the open land. Before the first shot was ever fired, the wind already knew this story would not end quietly. Cowboy, if you want to marry our sister, then by sacred law, you must satisfy the sisters first. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The last stretch of sunlight hung low across Red Willow Basin as evening spread long, shadows over the land, turning the tall grass a muted gold while the cold crept in fast. Grant Hale rode along a narrow ridge on his bay horse, his breath fogging faintly with every exhale. One hand rested on the reins while the other hovered, near the worn holster at his hip. Not from fear, but from habit carved by years of drifting through places where help rarely arrived on time. At 38, Grant carried the look of a man shaped by distance and hard decisions. Faded scars traced his jaw. Threads of grey edged his short brown hair, and the lines near his eyes spoke of too many solitary nights. He wasn't riding for work. He wasn't chasing anyone, and no one waited for him. He'd come into these foothills because he preferred the quiet, and because days earlier he'd seen smoke curling up from this direction and wanted to know if it meant settlers in trouble or drifters stirring it. Grant had spent most of his adult life repairing what other men left broken: fences, wagon wheels, fragile truces, sometimes bones, without ever staying long enough to be thanked. He'd never tried to build a life of his own, not since losing the one he rarely spoke of. Guiding his horse down the slope, his eyes caught a thin, uneven ribbon of smoke rising from the remains of a structure below. The fire looked small, fading, the kind started out of need, not comfort. He slowed, studying the ground. Tracks marked the dirt, scattered and uneven, as if someone had stumbled or been dragged. His pulse tightened, that familiar warning that something had gone wrong. He dismounted, letting the horse follow loosely, and approached the ruined shelter with measured steps. The shack had once been a simple hunting cabin, but the roof had collapsed inward, beams jutting at sharp angles. A torn strip of canvas flapped weakly from a nail, whispering in the breeze. Grant circled first, scanning the grass. No horses, no packs, no bodies. Then he saw a hand lying still beside a fallen log, fingers slightly curled as if they had clutched something before surrendering. He moved quickly but carefully, pushing aside brush. A young Apache woman lay half-covered by a worn blanket, her body twisted from an attempt to crawl away. She was breathing barely, each breath shallow and unsteady. Her long black hair was tangled, feathers bent out of place. Her bronze skin had gone pale with cold, and dried blood marked the torn edge of her deerskin dress. Grant knelt beside her, a jolt of concern tightening his chest. He hated the sight of anyone suffering alone, especially someone this young. When his hand brushed the blanket near her shoulder, her eyes snapped open, fear flashing instantly. Her muscles tensed as though expecting violence. Grant raised both hands slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. Her breath shook, but she didn't look away. She tried to push herself up, pain cutting through her side and forcing a sharp gasp as she fell back. She tried to turn away, to hide. "Let me help," he murmured, voice gentler. Sliding his arms beneath her, he felt how light she was, how her body trembled with cold and blood loss. Her fingers clutched his coat for a heartbeat before she pulled them back, ashamed of the instinct. He said nothing, offered no promises she might not trust. He carried her to his horse, lifting her onto the saddle and wrapping her in the spare blanket he kept for bitter nights. When she sagged forward, he steadied her with one arm and mounted behind, riding toward a small lime cabin he knew miners had once used. He'd passed it often but never slept there. He preferred the open sky. Tonight she needed walls, warmth, and clean cloth more than he needed the stars. The cabin sat tucked between 2 slabs of stone. The door groaned as he pushed inside. The place was rough but serviceable. A cot along the wall, a warped table, a few crates, and a stone hearth dusted with old ash. He carried her in and laid her carefully on the cot. She tried to sit up, stubborn even in weakness, but pain pulled her back down, jaw tight with frustration. Grant filled a tin bowl from his canteen, and tore strips from a spare shirt in his saddlebag. When he pulled back the blanket to check her wound, she seized his wrist with surprising strength, eyes blazing with warning. "No wrong touch," she whispered, voice raw. Grant didn't pull away. He met her gaze steadily. "Just cleaning the wound." She held on a moment longer, breathing fast with fear and exhaustion, then released him. He worked carefully, washing away dried blood and examining the cut along her ribs. It looked like a blade or jagged metal had done it. She winced as cold water touched her skin, fingers gripping the cut. He wrapped the wound firmly until the bleeding stopped, then drew the blanket back over her. Her body loosened slightly as warmth seeped in. "My name is Tally," she whispered, voice steadier. "Grant," he replied. She studied him in the dim firelight, searching the face of the man who had lifted her from the dirt. "You travel alone," she said quietly. "Why stop for me?" Suspicion edged her words, but beneath it lived a fragile hope. Grant paused. "You were hurt." "That's enough reason." She listened to the fire crackle, watching how he moved, calm, unhurried, never staring the way some men did. He checked the room once and sat beside the cot, elbows on his knees, ready to keep watch. "I'll stay here," he added. "If anyone comes, I'll hear them." Her breathing steadied, not from trust yet, but from the simple fact that he wasn't hiding anything. He didn't ask what had happened. The bruises and fear told him enough for now. She needed sleep more than questions. As night deepened, Tally drifted off with the stiffness of someone unused to safety. Grant remained awake, listening to the wind scrape the cabin walls. He didn't know who might be searching for her, but he assumed someone would. People didn't end up alone and bleeding without a reason. He glanced at her, breathing slow now, face younger in rest than fear had allowed. He stayed in the chair until dawn, never closing his eyes. Trouble rarely waited for daylight. He didn't know that within hours the door would open and two Apache women would step. Inside, one tall and stern, the other smaller and sharp-eyed, and the quiet life he'd built would begin to shift. The door pushed inward with a rush of cold air, and Grant lifted his head at once as two figures entered. Both froze when they saw him. Their eyes moved to Tally, to the bandages, then back to Grant with suspicion and something heavier, responsibility. The taller woman stood forward, shoulders broad, a bone necklace resting against her deerskin dress as if shielding the younger sister behind her. The smaller one scanned every corner of the room, gaze quick and precise. Silence held for a moment. Grant rose slowly, hands visible. The older sister moved to the cot, relief tightening her features when she saw Tally breathing evenly. She brushed strands of hair from Tally's face with tenderness that spoke of fear barely contained. Tally stirred, sensing her. "Asha," she murmured. The older sister's expression softened only for her, then turned back to Grant, posture rigid. "You touch her?" "Only to stop the bleeding," Grant said. The younger sister stepped closer, studying the bandages, the clean water, the chair beside the bed. "You were alone with her all night?" "She was fading," he answered quietly. The sisters exchanged a glance thick with unspoken questions. They hadn't expected to find their youngest alive, much less cared for by a stranger. Asha spoke again. "Why help her?" Grant scratched the back of his neck. Leaving her didn't feel right. The younger sister watched him closely. "Many men leave, or worse. I'm not that kind." She held his gaze a moment longer, then returned to Tally, resting a hand on her arm. Tally's fingers curled around hers weakly. Asha straightened. She refused marriage. They called her unclaimed. They sent men after her. Understanding settled over Grant, the torn feathers, the wound, the frantic tracks. He felt a quiet anger sharpen inside him. "They're close," the younger sister added. Grant nodded slowly. "If they come, I won't let them take her." Tally shifted, eyes half open, looking between them. "You carried me," she whispered. He nodded once. "You were freezing." Asha watched the exchange, measuring every word. Nomi glanced toward the window. "We must hide our trail." "I'll handle outside," Grant said. Asha studied him. "You would help us." "I'm not letting trouble find her again." For a moment, silence settled. Then Tally whispered, "He didn't leave." Something in Asha's expression shifted, subtle but real. Grant moved toward the door, but Asha's voice stopped him. "Cowboy," he turned. "You saved her. Sacred law speaks of that. To marry our sister, you must please her sisters first." Grant stiffened slightly, surprise flickering beneath his calm. Nomi watched him carefully, gauging his understanding. Asha continued evenly. "Pleasure in our law is not touch. It means proving worth, protection, endurance, standing when danger comes." Grant absorbed the weight of it. He had lived without belonging for years, and now 3 women looked at him as though his choice mattered. He met Tally's eyes, saw the quiet fear he might walk away. "No one's chasing you out," he said. "Not while I'm here." Tally's eyes closed, relief softening her face. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint hint of distant movement. Grant stepped into the morning cold, the decision already made. The wind carried a warning across the basin long before the riders appeared. A low, restless hush that made the grass ripple like something alive. Grant had just finished circling the cabin, brushing out tracks and reinforcing the loose boards. When he saw them, 3 figures cresting the far ridge, silhouettes dark against the pale morning sky. They weren't rushing. They moved with the steady patience of men who believed time was already on their side. Inside, the cabin held a fragile stillness. Tally slept, color slowly returning to her face, while Asha and Nomi watched the door with the quiet focus of women who had spent too long expecting trouble. Grant stepped back inside, closing the door softly behind him. "They're coming," he said, voice calm but firm. Asha rose at once, her shoulders squaring. Nomi moved to Tally, brushing her hair back gently, whispering something soft in their language. Tally's eyes fluttered open, fear surfacing for a heartbeat before she saw Grant standing there, steady as the cabin walls. "You don't have to fight for me," she murmured weakly. Grant shook his head. "I'm not fighting for a claim. I'm standing because it's right." Asha watched him, and for the first time there was no test in her gaze, only acceptance. Outside, hoofbeats drew closer, muffled by the frost-hardened earth. Grant stepped onto the porch, the cold biting through his coat, and waited. The riders halted several yards away, their expressions hard, certain. The one in front spoke first, his tone edged with authority. "The girl belongs with us." Grant didn't raise his voice. "She belongs to herself." Silence stretched, taut as a pulled wire. The men glanced at one another, measuring the lone figure before them, the quiet resolve that left no room for intimidation. After a long moment, the leader's eyes shifted to the cabin, then back to Grant. Something in his stance, unwavering, immovable, told them this would not be easy and not worth the cost. With a final look, he turned his horse. One by one, the others followed, their shapes shrinking against the wide morning light until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Grant exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders as the wind reclaimed the empty space. When he stepped back inside, Asha met him halfway, placing a hand over her heart in silent respect. Nomi smiled, relief bright in her eyes. Tally pushed herself up slightly, wincing but determined. "You stayed," she said. Grant gave a small nod. "I said I would." The fire crackled softly, the cabin warm despite the cold outside. And in that quiet moment something unspoken settled between them, not obligation, not debt, but the beginning of trust. Days later, when Tally could walk without pain and the sisters prepared to leave the basin, she paused beside Grant in the morning light. "You could come with us," she said, hope gentle but clear. Grant looked out over the open land, the same endless horizon he had ridden alone for years. Then he looked back at her, at the strength she had found, at the family that now welcomed him without conditions. A faint smile touched his face. "I think I will." Together they rode out of Red Willow Basin, not chased, not bound, but choosing the same road. And for the first time in a long while, Grant didn't feel like he was drifting. He felt like he was arriving,